Hi again. Kenneth Scott Latourette, page 358 of A History of Christianity. The Decline of the Carolingians. With the death of Charlemagne in 814, the Carolingian power entered upon a decline. It was not sudden, but none of his line who followed Charlemagne and had his ability, and the Carolingian structure depended so largely upon the quality of the monarch that as the latter deteriorated, the fabric fell apart. Charlemagne's immediate successor, Louis the Pious, who reigned from 814 to 840, was deeply religious, in a monastic rather than his father's lay fashion, but he did not possess the force and administrative gifts of his sire. The impetus given by his predecessors carried the realm forward, and he was crowned as Roman emperor. As was to be expected, he was active in ecclesiastical affairs. The synods continued the reform movement. True to his convictions, Louis was especially concerned with improving the quality of monastic life. To this end, he called to his assistance Witiza, that's spelled Witiza, better known as Benedict of Aniane. Born about the year 750, Benedict was now in his mid-60s. The son of a Gothic count, he had served in the court under Pepin the Short and Charlemagne. Then in his 20s, he had renounced the world and entered a monastery. Disturbed by the laxity in the house which he had chosen, he founded a monastery of his own at Aniane, in which he sought to restore the observance of the rule of Benedict in its full strictness, and with a special emphasis upon worship and self-denial. His example proved contagious, and by the time of Charlemagne's death, many other houses were adhering closely to the Benedictine ideal. Louis made Benedict of Aniane his advisor on monastic affairs, and the order went forth that all monasteries in the realms must follow the Benedictine rule as interpreted by him. The death of Louis the Pious in 840 was followed, in 843, by the division of the realm between his three sons, Lothair I, who was given the imperial title and who received the region which included the Frankish portions of Italy and the valley of the Rhone, Louis, because of his assignment known as the German, to whom went the area east of the Rhone, and Charles the Bald, who was apportioned most of the modern France and who was eventually, in 875, exactly 75 years after that had happened to his grandfather, to be crowned Roman emperor by the Pope on Christmas Day in St. Peter's. This division, the civil strife which followed, and continued quarrels among the subsequent scions of the Carolingian line brought added internal weakness. Not immediately, however, did collapse come. The intellectual and religious activity which had been encouraged by the great Carolingians went on well into the 9th century. Charles the Bald was abler than his father, and his court was a center of learning. It was not until the latter part of the 9th and the forepart of the 10th century that the darkness became intense. Now here, of course, Latourette is alluding to the phrase which, at least when I was a kid, was the general description of this period of history, the Dark Age, or the Dark Ages of the Church. Now, we don't refer to that period of the late first millennium anymore as the Dark Age. We usually call it just medieval times. I'm going to put in a link to Adel Saffer's discussion of the Dark Ages, so-called, and the comparison he makes being that he is a converted Jew who became a very famous Christian of the 19th century. He made the comparison, as many have, between the Dark Ages, so-called, of the Church and the Dark Ages of Israel in the Old Testament. And he points out that even though it is true that some ages have more light than others, and some ages can truly be called dark, for instance, the period of the Judges, or the period of the kings, from Solomon onward anyway, when there were probably no more than 6 or 7 decent kings in both the northern and the southern kingdoms, he points out, Saffer does, that God has always had a faithful remnant. In fact, the remnant principle is very clear in that very period that not only generated these corrupt kings in the line of David and in the northern kingdom, but especially in the prophets. The prophets were God's answer to those dark ages. So just so in Christian history, in the darker periods of it, somebody has been raised up by God, and they have provided temporal solutions and also a good change of direction for the church in general. And so it was in the so-called dark ages of Europe, and even when the papacy was at its worst in, let's say, the period from the 12th century to the 14th, some of the brightest lights of Christendom were raised up during that very period. So Adel Safar, I'll put on your screen, his description, his comparison of the church and Israel at its worst. See you next time.